We're delighted to celebrate Easter with you this year here at St. John's. Our gospel reading today is from the 16th chapter of Mark. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Solomon bought spices so they might go and anoint Jesus' body. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed, for you're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place where they laid him. But go tell the disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. In the musical Hamilton, he is fired up and ready to go. He wants to make a difference. He is willing to die even for the cause of revolution. George Washington turns to Alexander Hamilton and says, "Dying is easy, young man. Living is harder. Since once you die, you're out." And when the Sabbath is over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Solomon, went to anoint the body of Jesus. Living is harder, because living people care for bodies all the way down to death. Our baptism as Christians points us into the difficulty of living, caring for other people in the world God made our whole life long. On Good Friday, Rome demonstrates the easy choice, and its only reward is that it's easy. The Romans crucified Jesus. Rome had killed people before who had stepped out of line, seeking death as a way to silence the voices of people who bring an inconvenient word revealing an uncomfortable truth. God comes to bring life, and Jesus' teaching to the disciples is one that affirms the goodness of life, that seeks to nourish the lives of people, especially people who are down and trampled on. Easter is a call to disciples to rise up and care for people in the world God made. I'll never forget years ago down in Fort Lauderdale, the sunny springtime morning when Eric knocked on the door because Tim had been hit in the head and was bleeding on the sidewalk. Eric simply asked if I would call 911. A few minutes later, Eric knocked urgently on the door again. I had just gotten off the phone. Did I call? No one had shined up, and the pool of blood was getting larger. I ran out with the phone in my hand and dialed 911 a second time. Help is on the way, I was told. It was protocol for the paramedics to wait for the police to show up because I had reported that a person had been hit in the head. Fortunately for us, the paramedics were waiting just a block away. And when they heard that the pastor was standing on the site and called again, they figured they could proceed to the scene without a police escort. In a time when people are tired of being in their homes and when debates rage about whether we should wear masks, when we struggle to understand what law and order means in our time, what is guiding and convicting me on this Easter day are the places where I fall short, in the actions that I take individually and the actions that we take collectively as a congregation in a society. Easter calls us to act in deed and word, to speak to the goodness of all life, because it's far more difficult to seek the welfare of all people than it is to center decision-making on what I want to do or what is in an individual self-interest. The revolutionary nature of discipleship and following Jesus is revealed especially against the backdrop of Hamilton and the American Revolution. The American Revolution, as I understand it, could not have happened without weapons of war and fighting and death. From the moment in the garden when Jesus tells his disciple to put away the sword as he is arrested, and for generations afterwards, disciples had no standing army, no weapons of war at their immediate disposal. The disciples simply have the call to live and care for people in the world God made for them. The nonviolent posture lasted for several hundred years. And it wasn't until Constantine wants to become emperor of what becomes the Roman Empire and converts to Christianity, at least in part, to draw Christians into military service. Do disciples in large numbers take up arms and weapons of war for the first time in an organized way? Dying is easy. Living is harder. The women showed up to do the work, to prepare and anoint a body early on Easter morning. Then the angel sets them on a new task. Go tell the disciples and Peter that Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Rising from the tomb, Jesus is walking ahead of us to the road to Galilee. Just as importantly for disciples, the work to be done has changed. It's no longer the work of variable. It's the work of living. It's the work of proclaiming the news Jesus is risen, and God's people shall arise. In the midst of this one difficult life we get to live, we are surrounded and invited to walk the way to Galilee with people who seek life in God's name. Like Mary Magdalene and Mary and Solomon, we don't get to stay at the tomb. Sure, we can take a peek inside and verify that it's empty if we must, but we don't get to stay here. Living is harder because it draws us into contact to live our lives among people who may be at equal turns similar and different from us. And from the beginning, Jesus instructs his disciples to make this life better through works of love, feeding the hungry, healing the sick, gathering the outcasts and the sinners together to share a meal around a table, crossing boundaries of tribe and culture and language to present the love of God to each and every person, no exclusions. Over the past year, it has, at times in our life together, felt like we've taken up residence in a tomb, a dark and damp and cold and uncomfortable place where death feels like it's lurking nearby. Which brings me back to Hamilton. King George cheekily sings in the musical, "Oceans rise and empires fall, and we've seen each other through it all. And when push comes to shove, I will send a full-armed battalion to remind you of my love." Ah, there it is, isn't it? Oceans rise, empires fall. The crumbling of an empire is seen through the way it reaches for violence and weapons in the name of power and control. Silencing people through force and death is the way of an empire about to crumble under its own weight. Across history of time and space and geography, empires, however you want to know them or name them, be they Roman or British, have fallen. For all their powers and might, empires fall. And through it all, Jesus rises, rising from the tomb, and calling disciples to pursue a path in stark difference to empires, to walk together, to form the way of God by walking and inviting other people to come alongside, living into the call to care for people in the world God made. Discipleship is durable from generation to generation as it seeks to embrace this call to care for people and care for the world. Regardless of the various forms of government it encounters, whether it be kings and queens, presidents and prime ministers, Caesar or Pharaoh. All can and will be tempted to seek and claim a central place in the lives of people, tempted by power and access to weapons of war. The power that God reveals in Jesus is the power to give generously and affirm and build up life as the cause to dedicate our life to. It's the power in the biblical language of fruitfulness, where the fruits of the earth nourish the creatures God made, and the fruits illuminate beauty and simplicity and complexity all at once. The struggle as we live this Easter morning is that we continue to live in a world where the mighty from their thrones are tempted by the lure of empire. Easter, though, echoes the musical. Oceans rise and empires fall. Jesus is risen through it all. God comes back. Mary, don't you see? And when push comes to shove, God sends disciples to remind you of God's love. Jesus will come back. Soon you'll see. Jesus cries, remember, you belong to me. Together we'll walk that road to Galilee. Jesus will rise. Empires will fall. God's love remains through it all. And when push comes to shove, the Spirit will descend like a dove and lead the way for God's people. This is the way, and love will see us through it all. Don't be afraid when death tries to get in the way. God comes back for us this day, because when push comes to shove, Jesus walks beside us to remind us you're loved. Jesus will rise. Empires will fall. God's love remains through it all. Amen.